On to the cost of living campaign in North Lanarkshire. And I'm just going to take you through, from start to finish, some of the thought processes we had about this campaign. So the what? What is the cost of living? Institute for Government define it in a very dry kind of way, as you would expect. The cost of living crisis refers to the fall in real disposable incomes, adjusted for inflation and after taxes and benefits that the UK has experienced since late 2021. I'm much more interested in the second explanation. And I think as comms people, it's really important that we are more interested in the really human explanation. And this is Anastasia, who's 61. She's not from North Lanarkshire, but Anastasia, interviewed in December, was planning to cook on a camping gas cooker using a portable gas heater to warm one room. She buys the cheapest possible food that she can, and she's been hand washing all her laundry to avoid using the washing machine. So it's fine to have, I guess my point is that it's fine to have quite a prosaic discussion about the meaning of something before you start a campaign. And we're all used to using personas. We'll all have experience using personas, and we'll all have experience thinking about the real person. But from my point of view, in terms of trying to direct a campaign, I always want to bring it back to those stories, because those are the things that are powerful. Those are the things that mean something. And I think your comms has to mean something. Okay, find the right button. Okay, North Lanarkshire, fourth largest local authority in Scotland by population. Mostly post-industrial, historic high unemployment, which we've been making a lot of inroads onto, but there's still some pretty difficult challenges in North Lanarkshire. Nearly one in three children in North Lanarkshire live in poverty. That is a disgrace. Okay, so that figure is coming down, I'm pleased to say, but it's not coming down quickly enough. And every single person on the management team at North Lanarkshire Council is solely focused on that statistic, week in, week out, because that's what we need to change. And it's not, we can't do that in isolation, the council can't do it in isolation, but everybody engaged in policy, in public policy, in comms, in health, has to be focused on that statistic. By January this year, 1 in 3 households in Scotland were predicted to be in extreme fuel poverty. That's quite shocking as well, I think. 1 in 3 households in Scotland, so a third of households in Scotland. And critically, and there's been a lot of talk today about internal and how you work with internal audiences as well as the external audience and have that buy-in. 83% of North Lanarkshire Council's 16 and a bit thousand employees live in North Lanarkshire. So any campaign that we're designing that's about supporting people has to also support our employees. Okay, so I think that's and it's easy to forget that. It's, in my experience, it's quite easy to forget that you do a big external campaign and then sort of butt internal comms onto the end of it, almost as an afterthought. It's critical from our point of view that, and a lot of these employees are low-paid employees. So how do we make sure that we capture that as well? Okay, so objectives, I think, for this campaign. The first is don't panic. Okay. Round about this time last year, we were starting to have some conversations at a management level, but also at a political level, about the looming, at that point, cost of living crisis. Okay. It was starting to get quite real in terms of some of those discussions, in terms of some of the external media coverage of it, and what was coming down the track, particularly as it related to fuel costs. In that environment, and I don't know how many, hands up in here if you work in a political environment. In other words, you work in a council or government, or so quite a few. Yeah, well, yeah. So you will all understand that politicians, for absolutely the right reasons, hear of an issue and want to fix that issue. Okay, it's what politics really at its heart is. So the challenge about not panicking is for people like me to say, well, we can't actually fix this issue. And politicians quite often don't want to hear people like me saying we can't actually fix this issue. So what can we actually do that is meaningful and that will make a difference? Because North Lanarkshire Council big organisation though it is, cannot solve the cost of living crisis on its own. There are a whole bunch of factors at a macro level that have to play into that any decision that we make about how we do that. What will make the biggest difference then? So if you accept that we can't fix it all, what can we do that will make the biggest single difference? What will the demand be for that thing? And the most challenging bit of this whole campaign is we had literally no idea. We had no idea what the demand would be for our services. Five, how, you know, I've written numbers here actually. How big does the team need to be? In other words, who needs to be involved to deliver not just the comms campaign, but the customer service aspect, the inbound aspect of that, and managing all of that traffic. So that was our objectives. What can we do and deliver it in a way that is meaningful with a team that can deliver it in a way that is meaningful? That's your objective. Okay, so we don't know what demand's going to be, so where do you start? You know, we have to start somewhere. You have to have a guess at it. So we worked with some very clever people internally and externally to say, well, what do we know? What do we know? What do we think? Who do we think might be impacted by the cost of living crisis, particularly as it relates to fuel, particularly as it relates to fuel costs? 25% of the population of North Lanarkshire is over 65. 33% of all households have only one adult. So if you're going to do something for over 65s and you're going to do something for households with only one adult, and 50% of all residents, I talked about the child poverty statistics earlier, but 50% of residents live in Scottish Index of Multiple Deprivation levels 1, 2 and 3. In other words, the most deprived communities in Scotland, 50% of our residents live in SIMD levels 1, 2 and 3. We spoke to our Tackling Poverty team who do incredible work around money advice and you know, every day. And what they were telling us, and you probably, some of you may be aware of this, that cash is now becoming the more preferred way to help people, rather than go through some kind of endless process and separating people out into one queue and another. School meals is a perfect example of this, free school meals, where, you know, you're trying to avoid stigma for a start. Absolutely want to avoid stigma. But cash is, and people sometimes say to me, well, but Stephen, look, if you give people cash, they'll just go and spend it on, and we saw this during COVID, they're just going to spend it on drink or cigarettes. Well, will they? Can you show me the evidence for that? And when you actually start to poke around that argument, there is no evidence for it whatsoever. Sure, some people will, but just because some people will is not a good reason not to have people direct their own lives in the way that they see fit, in the way that is most beneficial to them and their family unit, whatever that family unit might look like. I've used the term working well here, which is more often used in terms of people's health conditions, but the reality is we expected, because of the cost of fuel, for people who would normally never have sought support, financial support, ever in their lives, to suddenly start needing that financial support. How do you talk to those people who have never had that type of engagement with a local authority before, and how do you do that? And then clearly, I've mentioned stigma. Stigmatizing people is problematic on two levels. It's problematic for the individual, and I can guarantee you that if you don't work to move stigma aside, then you will have problems in delivery. Okay, so minimizing the risk of stigma is massively important. Okay, so a little bit about some of the strategy behind this. So you can see those little icons under the cost of living word there, and those were just kind of themes, okay, for us. So cash, fuel, health, family support, safety, and place, okay. And if we could group everything under those things, then we figured that would be a good starting point for us. You didn't have to know what those icons meant. You would recognise them if you saw individual pieces of advice, but it was really just a way of us organising the strategy. And I think what's most important from my point of view about this is it just says cost of living. It doesn't say living with less was one of the ideas that the team came up with. It doesn't say any number of brilliantly creative things. I'm a great believer in just saying what it is. And I suppose this was, if I think back to the early days of COVID, we all say COVID now. But I can promise you, if you've listened back to yourself speaking in the first sort of March, April 2020, none of you used the word COVID. You all used the word coronavirus. And so for the first 2 or 3 months of talking about COVID, that we now just call COVID, we called it coronavirus in all our campaign work. I think that's really important. What are the things that people are hearing in the external media, in the environment? They're hearing cost of living. They're not hearing some form of that. They're just hearing about a cost of living crisis. So the best thing I think you can do is, just call it what it is, okay? Okay, what we're trying to do, help with fuel costs, cash, okay? So what was needed? We knew some things, but not all the things. I've already said to you that the demand, we had no clue what the demand would be. We knew cash was important. We knew fuel costs would be the biggest pressure. How easy could we make it for people to apply for help? So what was the easiest methodology? And when we started, we took this terribly complicated web form and tried to just hone it down. And now there comes a point where you can't tone it down anymore. There comes a point where you have to gather certain amounts of information if you're going to give people public money. And so, but how easy could we make it? And when we were doing that, what could we also do in terms of things like child payments? So one of the budget lines that from the policy perspective was something called the NLC child payment, which was £125 for every child who was in receipt of free school meal entitlement. How could we make it easy if somebody was concerned to find out about the child payment, to then take them into down the fuel support with fuel route? So, a lot of thought from people much smarter than me went into how the architecture of all that and how that looks. Present advice in one place. We are not the experts in lots of cases. So we took quite an early decision to say, well, who can people trust? It isn't necessarily your organisation. It isn't necessarily the council. So how can you work with other organisations and take their trusted information and take people to that information rather than rewriting or recreating resources that actually, there are better places to go for those resources. So I suppose from an organisational point of view, park the ego a wee bit. You don't have to be the expert in everything. Was one of the things we tried to do and tried to deliver. We asked the Tackling Poverty team to identify the most trusted resources for different topics within the kind of cost of living envelope, and those were the resources we used. And pull all that resource into one place, make it easy for people to navigate, make it easy for people to find. And by this point, the policy bit had moved on a little bit. So as well as doing the cash thing and the fuel payments and the child payment, there was also a desire from a policy perspective to do drop-in places, warm places. They've been called various things across the country. There was kind of a momentum behind them by that stage. There was you will recall reading lots about them. Places where people could go that were warm, they could get a hot drink, something to eat. And so we had a network of these places, or we decided to have a network of these places, but where? The stuff that we controlled, that's the obvious thing, isn't it? When councils own lots of buildings, lots of community centres, lots of leisure centres, schools, all sorts of things. Are we the right people to deliver that in a meaningful way? Are we the trusted people in there? And really the answer to that is no. The trusted people were the people in community organisations, third sector organisations who were already delivering support at a real granular community level. We could never hope to recreate that success. So what we decided to do was support them, give them money to help deliver a number of drop-in sessions, work with them all to map out where those were, work with them to then change their plans so that we didn't have massive crossover in one particular area, so that there was a geographical spread, there was a time spread, there was a community spread of these places. And then we got out of the way. And I think that's a really important thing. Know when, my instinct about all this is know what you can do to help, and then get out of the way. Because you're not necessarily the best organisation to deal with this. So make those connections, find the best people to do it, help them do it, and then just get out of that space. It's not, so, and I suppose when I think about inbound, there's a lot of discussion today about social media conversations, about people talking about your organisation. There was the example used earlier on about the police not turning up when they were never going to turn up. I think one of the best things you can do to avoid having that kind of direction is facilitate what you can. Don't make it about you. Don't make it about your ego as an organisation, your organisational ego. Because actually the most important thing is that you're delivering results for people, not that you get the kind of kudos from it. And it's interesting that one of the things, I'll come on to this in a second, but in terms of implementation, one web portal, you can't really see that just now, that doesn't really matter. The point is that we were gathering all in one place. Easy Peasy Cook was quite an interesting thing. Easy Peasy Cook was a thing we did during COVID, because we had loads of people telling us that their child was missing their school meals, particularly the chicken curry on a Wednesday. So one of the team came to me and said, look, we need to get the recipes for this chicken curry. What? This is like May 2020, right? The world is collapsing around our ears, and we were busy trying to find somebody who could give us the recipe for this chicken curry. And so we got the recipe, and then we got the recipe for like the apple crumble and a whole range of things, crucially that were cheap. They were easy to cook. You could do it. Obviously, we had to adapt them because the school chicken curry is actually cooked in vats in industrial kitchens. So we had to find a way to deal with all of that. Wildly popular. I can't begin to tell you how popular that section of the website was. So when it came to dealing with cost of living, what we said was, can we just use that, because we know the recipes are cheap. We know we can tell people what the nutrient value is. We know they're reasonably nutritious. They obviously meet minimum standards in terms of all that. So what can we just use that? So actually a lot of things that we were already doing were quite useful. And then of course we mapped all the drop-in centres. So anybody could go and see where their nearest drop-in centre was. This is all the things you would expect me to say. This is all the tactical stuff. We paid for digital, obviously. We did the organic digital thing on all our channels. We paid for outdoor, particularly in buses. Really interesting. Everybody does want to get their hands on the new cutting edge technology, but you know what? Sometimes you need a poster. When I started in comms, which was not yesterday, people said, we need a poster. Well, why do you need a poster? We just need a poster, right? And we've got we want a competition with schools so that they can design the poster. Now, this was routinely the most terrible idea in the room, okay? Actually, what was interesting is a lot of the people we were trying to reach weren't really that engaged with us or our partners online. They did, however, drop into their community centre. They did, however, go to the doctor's surgery. They did, however, drop into all these places. So we just actually did some posters, and actually sometimes that's really what you have to do. Internal channels I talked about, massively important to us in terms of making sure about employee staff well-being was really important in all of that, and making sure that staff had access to the same things. 83% of them live in North Lanarkshire. They're residents as much as they are staff. They're service users as much as they're staff. Elected members were really important. Councillors were really important. They are in the heart of their communities. And it's all very well giving them a committee report and saying, this is what we're going to do. You have to go further, I think, for something like this. So we gave them a toolkit. We gave them a supply of posters. We gave them, I suppose, the core script, if you like, about what we were trying to do, so that they could speak to people about it. And then, I suppose, one of the other things was we didn't do any PR opportunities for councillors around the drop-in places. So your natural instinct, if you work with politicians, is to say, yes, councillor, we'll wheel you out for a photo call with us, right? We resisted quite fiercely any suggestion that that was going to happen. And that comes back to the stigma point. I kept saying to councillors or and to other people, this is not a spectator sport, okay? People in desperate need is not a spectator sport. Once we do an evaluation, we do all that good stuff and we announce what we're going to do next year, sure, we can do something. But we're not going to wheel you round to a community centre, councillor, so that you can stand with your arm around somebody, you know, and smiling into the camera. We're just not going to do that. And to be fair to councillors, they got that. They understood it. And then finally, the bit that's not on the slide is the helpline, you know, contact centre. Can you deal with inbound traffic that's going to be created as a result of this? And that was a learning from COVID as well. Okay, we're nearly there, I promise. How did we evaluate all this? Well, look, some of these are just metrics, some of these are really important, but 10% of all unique page views on North Lanarkshire Council's website between November and March were on the cost of living pages. That's pretty substantial. You know, that's a pretty substantial chunk of our inbound traffic. We had 4,000 inbound direct requests for support through the helpline. So that goes beyond people applying for, you know, fuel hardship money or the child payment. Between the fuel hardship and the NLC child payment, £4.4 million was distributed to residents in North Lanarkshire. We invested £400,000 in those third sector groups and those community groups to help them augment their offer and, you know, provide a warm place. There was an average of 35 visitors per session across North Lanarkshire. So some there were 100, some there were 10, but there was an average of 35. And 83% of people who were surveyed after the fact thought the council's cost of living response made a positive difference in their community. The most important two numbers on there are the 4,000 inbound direct requests and the £4.4 million. That's the things that really make a difference. I suppose we're just starting to pull together a lot of this in terms of what we're planning or going to do from a policy perspective in the winter coming. But all of this is really useful. I suppose the couple of things to observe about evaluation and audience: it doesn't have to be best ever. You have to play with what you've got. You have to be able to do, you know, you can only use what you've got. You don't have to invest a huge heap of money in terms of evaluation, in my view. You just have to prove that what you're doing works. And I think all of that information is useful for policy people as well when they come to design the policy. So just back to demand, engagement, trust. We didn't know what the demand was. I said that at the start. Your audience isn't always straightforward. It's not always easy. I mean, a lot of the time you instinctively know, or you've done campaigns that have worked in the past and you know what your audience is, but it isn't always straightforward to try and ascertain that. Do your best, but also be ready to respond for what happens once you've launched the campaign. You've got to be ready to try and change what you do quite quickly if you have to do that. And so keep your eye on the traffic, keep your eye on all those inbound inquiries. What are they about? What the, you know, tracking numbers in the drop-in sessions allowed us to adapt as well. Because what we found was that in some places, 6 p.m. till 10 p.m. wasn't a popular time. And so therefore, why would you resource that if it's not a popular time? Why would you not say, well, what is popular? What is that community need? What is the intelligence you're getting back? And how can we support the third sector organisations to deliver that? And finally, I've already kind of said this, get out of the way. Engagement and trust for me go hand in hand. Who's best placed to engage? Is it you? Fine. If that's the case, go and engage. Is it another council team? Sure. Is it a partner? Or is it somebody in the community? Whatever the answer to that question is, and it'll vary across different places, it's always about the outcome. It's always about what you deliver. And that always comes down to trust for me. So find the best person, give them the tools to do it, and let them get on with it. Thank you very much. That
That's fantastic. Some quite eye-opening stats actually around sort of children poverty and things like that. And it's great to hear that that's the sort of number one purpose, I suppose, you said of the leadership team to solve that. Have we got any questions for Stephen?
Can you share the curry recipe?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, of course. Yeah. It's on the website. Yeah.
Actually, I had a question about the.
Before hit the mic. It's not because we can't hear you. Sorry. It's because annoyingly it doesn't come on the recordings. Sorry.
It was about the 4.4 million.
Yeah.
That you said was one of the most important figures. How did you budget for that as a local authority, not expecting a cost of living crisis to come over the horizon at you with quite such speed?
Okay, so in two ways, I guess. The first is that I can't remember the exact figure. I think 3.5 or thereby of that came from COVID recovery money. So there was a COVID recovery fund established by the Scottish Government, which each council got a chunk of money based on population and poverty and so on. And then the council from its own budget added to that. So the challenge is going to be this year enormous because the COVID recovery fund is gone. The councils have, as you're probably all definitely aware, all public sector bodies are aware, massive savings to make. So from the policy, so what's going to be important for this year is demonstrating if you're going to spend money, and it won't be 4.4 million, but if you're going to spend money, part of the evaluation is important to prove that approach works, and that approach, we should discard that approach.
So building on that question, what's the plan then to keep it alive? Because I think there's lots of news all the time, isn't it, at the moment?
Yeah.
And you can sort of become numb to it, can't you?
Yeah.
So what's the plan to keep the story going, if you like, and keep the citizens aware of what's going on and the support going?
I think there's a couple of things. The first is that although it is widely anticipated that fuel costs will not be anywhere like as high as they were in the winter just gone, they'll still be double what they were the winter before. Yeah. And so that pressure will undoubtedly, and food inflation is still going, and it looks like the predictions of how quickly inflation will fall are not quite coming true. So all of those things collide for the same people. How do you keep it going? Well, look, North Lanarkshire wasn't just providing support for people in need before this campaign. We constantly do that in any case. There is a tackling poverty team. We do work through the Scottish Welfare Fund and so on to help people. These are the conversations that are happening now, which is what do we do? What worked last year? What do we do? And how are we going to use that to keep going? But I think it's unlikely we will have the same amount of money to spend on it that we had last year.
Yeah, okay, so you've got to reuse some of the assets.
Yeah.
Like using the food recipes and all those sorts of things.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Any other questions? Thank you, Ming.
It was just around when you mentioned that you didn't put councillors front and centre for protocols. It's whether you had any pushback from that and how you dealt with it.
Yes, look, of course. One of the things about politicians is that they want to be seen to be doing good things as well as actually doing those good things. And I think, but look, I think ultimately this comes down to leadership and comms. I could do a whole separate talk on that. You've got to just be clear in your advice. You've got to articulate clearly why. And once you do that, actually, most people go, oh, yeah, okay, I get it now. I understand. So yeah, but you've got to just have those difficult conversations sometimes with anybody, whether that's politicians or leadership or any type of leadership. You've got to have a convincing reason and be able to articulate it. Now, it was clear to me that we weren't ever going to do this thing about stigma. Isn't it great that we're having to be in this place? It's really not great at all. So let's not do that. We did do right towards the end of the drop-ins. We did a thing, but we framed it as a thank you to the volunteers, because that's what it was. But not about having people who were using those facilities in any way photographed, identified, and so on.